Sharon Stone, a name etched deep into the memory of Hollywood, the woman who changed the history of cinema with her haunting portrayal of Catherine Tramell in Basic Instinct, a role that became an immortal symbol and still lingers in the world's collective memory after decades. She was once the brightest jewel of the film capital, the embodiment of powerful beauty, the most desired woman on the planet, celebrated on every red carpet, the standard of allure, and the ultimate sex symbol of the 1990s. Yet that glory quickly crumbled when a devastating brain hemorrhage struck at the very height of her career, stripping away almost everything. With only a 1% chance of survival, she lay motionless, fighting for every breath through 9 endless days. Her memory was stolen, her legs lost their strength, her marriage turned to ashes, and the child she loved more than life itself slipped from her arms in a grief beyond words. Today, at 67, when the world believes every storm has passed, once again, loss and sorrow descend, crushing what remains of her heart. Before we begin, if her talent and beauty ever touched your soul, do not forget to leave a like as a tribute to this extraordinary woman. Sharon Stone would one day stand unbroken against life's cruelest storms, yet her journey began as a fragile child in a small Pennsylvania town, learning far too soon that resilience is often carved out of heartbreak. Born on March 10, 1958, in Meadville, the steel-scented heart of Pennsylvania, she entered a world that demanded toughness before she even knew its meaning. Her father, Joseph, shaped metal with unyielding precision, his stern discipline echoing the hardships of his own youth, though in one rare and tender moment, his heart softened, reminding her that even the coldest steel could bend with love. Her mother, Dorothy, balanced ledgers by day and held the family together with quiet devotion by night, her steady presence the single thread keeping their home from unraveling. Sharon's brilliance was undeniable, an intelligence quotient of 154, yet in the classrooms of the 1960s that gift felt like a cruel burden, her racing thoughts marking her as different, leaving her to recall with aching honesty, "I always felt like I was living in a world that didn't speak my language." That difference drew whispers and laughter that stung like knives, lessons in isolation that scarred her childhood in ways no one else could see. Around the age of 9, a serious neck injury thrust her into the hospital, a chilling confrontation with fragility that reminded her how thin the line between safety and disaster could be. Then, at 14 in 1972, came another blow. What began as a carefree horseback ride ended in heartbreaking agony when she was thrown hard to the ground, pain searing through her neck and shoulders, an invisible wound that lingered for years and whispered with cruel clarity that survival was never guaranteed. By 15, she had already finished high school and stepped into Edinburgh University on scholarship, a triumph on paper that hid a lonelier truth. For while others her age were still searching for themselves, she was already carrying dreams too vast for the narrow sky above her hometown. Decades later, she would look back and recognize that her father's stern rules, her mother's steadfast warmth, her own isolating genius, and those frightening brushes with mortality had not been random misfortunes. They were the furnace that forged her endurance, the very trials that shaped her spirit. The Sharon Stone, who would one day mesmerize the world, was first born in Meadville's narrow streets, in classrooms where genius felt like exile, and in those relentless, heartbreaking moments when life reminded her again and again that strength is often born in silence, and the art of survival is learned far too young. She carried the lessons of Meadville into a world that glittered with promises, yet hid shadows just as cruel. In 1976, at only 18, urged by a family who believed in her grace before she could believe in herself, she stepped onto the stage of a small-town beauty pageant and walked away with the crown. Not just applause, but a key that opened the first door out of the steel town. That door led to New York, where the Ford modeling agency placed her beneath the bright glare of flashbulbs, her image on magazines, her smile repeated endlessly in photographs that looked perfect but felt hollow. "It looked beautiful from the outside," she would later confess, "but inside, I felt like a mannequin, seen but not heard." The emptiness of that glossy cage became unbearable, and out of that ache grew a hunger to be more than an image, to give voice to the storm inside her. Acting seemed like salvation, yet Hollywood greeted her with cold indifference. Casting rooms were not gateways, but battlegrounds, where she was told again and again that she was not sexy enough or the right kind of beautiful. Each rejection striking her like a stone pressed deep against her chest. "They wanted someone I couldn't pretend to be," she recalled years later, her voice steady but carrying the echo of wounds that had never fully healed. Through the late 1970s, she fought a quiet war for survival, pouring herself into acting classes, saying yes to every part, no matter how small, clinging to those chances as if they were air itself. In 1980, her first break arrived in Woody Allen's Stardust Memories, a moment so brief it vanished in an instant. Yet to Sharon, it was proof she had at least stepped through the door she had been pounding on for years. A year later came Deadly Blessing, 1981, a low-budget horror that offered little money but demanded everything of her endurance, teaching her what it meant to labor long days on set when no glamour could shield her from exhaustion. By 1984, in Irreconcilable Differences, she stood beside seasoned stars, absorbing lessons as if each one were oxygen feeding the fire of her determination. These roles did not make headlines, but they kept her flame alive, flickers of light trembling inside a tunnel of near invisibility. She endured the sterile politeness of casting directors, the waiting rooms crowded with women who seemed to fit better, the humiliation of being dismissed before she even read a line. And yet she walked away each time with a sliver of strength. She refused to surrender. Looking back, she would see those years not as wasted, but as the furnace in which her resilience was hammered into unbreakable shape. "It's easy to shine when the world is clapping for you," she later said, "but real strength comes when you're standing alone in the dark, clapping for yourself." The young woman who had once felt exiled in Meadville's classrooms now discovered a new survival, transforming rejection into fuel, silence into defiance. Every slammed door drove her to pound harder on the next. Every cold glance hardened her resolve to stand out rather than fade into sameness. She was not chasing fame, nor money, but the right to be seen for who she truly was, and no avalanche of no could push her back into the safety she had already outgrown. By the mid-1980s, one truth was undeniable. Sharon Stone was not another hopeful drifting through Hollywood. She was a fighter, forged from her father's discipline, her mother's quiet strength, and her own unshakable belief that somewhere there was a role that only she could bring to life. And when it came, she would not stumble into it by luck. She would arrive prepared, scarred but unbroken, carrying with her every painful step that had lifted her from Pennsylvania's steel towns to the edge of stardom. By 1992, at 34, Sharon Stone was no longer just an actress chasing auditions, but a survivor of years, scarred by rejection, still waiting for a role fierce enough to match her endurance. Basic Instinct was that role, a gamble that could crown her or crush her. Catherine Tramell demanded not beauty alone, but a fearlessness that could seduce and unsettle in a single glance, and Sharon carried into that audition every wound of a career built on struggle. Landing the part was triumph, but the set itself became another war zone. Under Paul Verhoeven's relentless eye, she delivered Catherine with such precision that the performance burned itself into cinema's memory. And then came the moment, the infamous leg crossing, filmed in a way she later confessed she had not foreseen. A flash of vulnerability transformed into an earthquake that shook the world, unleashing praise, outrage, and debate so consuming it remade her overnight from near invisible to an icon stamped across billboards from Los Angeles to Tokyo. Fame poured in like floodwaters. Salaries leapt from modest six figures to millions. Endorsements multiplied, red carpets and private jets replaced borrowed gowns and economy seats. "I went to bed one person and woke up another," she recalled, stunned by how quickly life had turned. Yet the tidal wave of success carried undertows she could not escape. The label of sex symbol clung to her like chains she had never chosen, and too many scripts became hollow reflections of Catherine, offering allure without depth. "It's a blessing and a curse," she admitted, "to be seen in a way that shows only half of who you are." She yearned for roles that demanded her mind as much as her beauty, but each offer became a test of how much she was willing to lose to be truly seen. Determined not to be caged by her own success, she searched for roles that cut deeper. In 1995, at 37, she became Ginger McKenna in Scorsese's Casino, a woman of glittering excess and inner ruin, fragile yet venomous. Sharon embodied Ginger with such raw truth that critics could not look away, earning her a Golden Globe and an Academy Award nomination, proof that her brilliance could no longer be denied. Casino shattered the glass box, proving she could shoulder complex drama as powerfully as she commanded thrillers. But shadows remained. Offers still circled back to echoes of Catherine and Ginger, tempting her with wealth but threatening her soul. She resisted, instead choosing roles that stretched her craft. A hard-edged prosecutor in Law and Order, SVU, a conflicted mother in Lovelace, 2013. Each transformation a reminder that she was not an image, but an artist. By the late 1990s, her life was a contradiction of glittering premieres and private battles. Glamour on the surface, and behind it, the quiet war of refusing roles that would have been easy money but empty art. She was wealthy, yes, but never safe, knowing every no risked fading into silence in an industry where invisibility is death. Still, Sharon had never lived safely. Risk was the ground she walked on, and each rejection of mediocrity was another fierce bet on herself. Looking back, she would say, "Success is not the prize, it's the test. What you do with it, that's who you really are." Her story in the 1990s was not only the rise of a star, but the forging of a woman who insisted on owning her craft, her image, her destiny, even when the world tried to trap her in a single unforgettable moment. And as the decade closed, Sharon Stone stood not only as a Hollywood icon, but as proof that real power lies not in fame alone, but in the unyielding courage to keep becoming more than they expect. The brighter Sharon Stone's star blazed across Hollywood's sky, the darker the shadows crept into her private life, shadows woven from solitude, broken promises, and the quiet shattering of dreams she once believed would steady her heart. In 1984, at only 26, just as her career was slowly gathering momentum, she thought she had found sanctuary away from the blinding cameras when she married television producer Michael Greenberg, a union that seemed, from the outside, almost fated. A rising actress and a man who knew the merciless rhythms of the industry, stepping forward hand in hand with ambition and hope. In those first months, she dared to imagine what the public never saw: the warmth of a family, a home anchored not by fame but by devotion, a life that might soften the chaos that followed her everywhere. "I thought we were building a life together," she would later recall in a rare and reflective interview, "but in reality, we were living two separate lives in parallel, always close, but never truly meeting in the middle." The glare of Hollywood's spotlight, however, is rarely merciful. Long separations stretched like unbridgeable oceans. Unspoken resentments grew heavier with each passing day, and the endless tug-of-war between two demanding careers began to tear apart the fragile fabric of their bond. Friends later remembered how often Sharon appeared on red carpets alone, her luminous smile still radiant for the cameras, yet carrying a distance only those closest could detect. The hidden ache of a woman learning the cruel lesson that love, in this world, could vanish as suddenly as a role might be cut from a script. By 1987, at only 29, just 3 years after vows whispered with hope, the marriage collapsed, leaving Sharon with no children, no enduring partnership, and a heart scarred by its first searing taste of heartbreak played out under public eyes. She never spoke of Michael with bitterness, but with a quiet resignation that revealed more pain than words ever could, once admitting, "Some endings don't need blame. They just leave a silence you learn to live with." And that silence was deafening, a presence that never left her, reminding her that even as her career inched closer to the dazzling heights she had once dreamed of in Meadville, her private world could still crumble into emptiness. It was the cruel paradox of her life, celebrated by millions, yet walking home alone, applauded by the world, yet carrying an ache unseen, a contrast so sharp it cut into her very soul. Looking back, that chapter became more than a memory of loss. It stood as a haunting reminder that success can magnify loneliness, that ambition without presence leaves cracks no spotlight can conceal, and that triumph and sorrow often arrive hand in hand, inseparable companions on the road she would be forced to walk. And yet, even with the wounds of her first marriage still raw beneath the surface, Sharon Stone dared once more to open her heart to love, a hope that would soon be tested in ways as subtle as they were painful. In 1988, when she was 30 years old and still carrying the silence of a divorce that had left her soul bruised, she met country music star Dwight Yoakam, a man whose charisma seemed to light a room before his boots even crossed the threshold, whose voice carried that rare blend of swagger and tenderness that could make even strangers lean closer. To Sharon, fresh from the ashes of broken vows, Dwight felt like a melody she had longed to hear, familiar yet thrilling, soothing yet full of promise. In those early weeks, their bond felt effortless, a harmony born without rehearsal. Industry events where their presence turned heads, late-night talks over simple meals where laughter softened the weight of their fame, long drives with country songs drifting from the radio while the city lights disappeared in the rearview mirror. These small, ordinary joys were what Sharon craved most. Moments of normalcy that stardom so often stole from her life. Reflecting years later, she admitted in a voice both wistful and aching, "I thought maybe this was my second chance, the love that would heal the cracks and let me breathe again." But the lives they lived were carved by relentless motion, never still long enough for roots to grow. His endless tours, the recording sessions that carried him across states, collided with her auditions and long days on film sets, leaving them more often apart than together. What once felt effortless began to feel fragile, stretched thinner with every airport goodbye and every lonely hotel room Sharon returned to. The echo of his absence reminding her far too much of the solitude she had promised herself she would never feel again. There were no scandals, no bitter fights to mark the end, only the quiet realization that love sometimes falters not from betrayal but from time itself, tearing at the seams. When their paths finally parted, it was with mutual respect yet wrapped in unspoken grief, the kind of sadness that leaves no villains, only two souls who could not hold on to what had once seemed so right. Sharon would later confess, "Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the gentle ones, because there's nothing to fix, just something you can't hold on to." That farewell carved into her another wound invisible to the cameras, not anger, but the haunting weight of what might have been. And so, as her career inched toward the long-awaited breakthrough she had fought for through endless auditions, her heart bore yet another bruise hidden beneath her smile. Proof that in her world, the brighter the lights became, the easier it was for love to slip like sand through her fingers, leaving her once more applauded by millions, yet carrying the silence of a woman who had learned that even the sweetest songs can end too soon. Just when Sharon believed her heart had finally grown strong enough to endure the tempests of fame, life placed before her a love that appeared to promise everything, yet tested her in ways she could never have imagined. In 1993, at 35, and standing on the highest peak of her career in the afterglow of Basic Instinct, her name was carved across headlines, her every step chased by cameras, yet behind the glitter of premieres and the brilliance of gowns, Sharon carried a quieter hunger, a longing for steadiness, for a sanctuary untouched by Hollywood's unrelenting noise. That year she met San Francisco businessman William J. McDonald, a man from far outside the stage and screen whose life seemed to offer exactly what she craved: stability, safety, and the possibility of a home that would not dissolve under the glare. Their bond was quick, almost too effortless, and friends remembered how her eyes lit differently when she spoke his name, her voice softening as if she feared the world might crush what was still fragile. He did not chase the spotlight, and that made her feel sheltered, as though for once she could rest her spirit. Within months, the relationship deepened, and when William proposed, the diamond ring felt less like a jewel than a promise, a fragile light she clung to, proof that perhaps the star who had conquered the screen might finally conquer loneliness too. "I remember thinking," she would later confess, "if I hold it safe enough, maybe this one will last." Those who loved her saw the change immediately, a calmness, a rare centering, as if the storm inside her had stilled. She and William dined quietly in San Francisco, walked hand in hand by the marina, and escaped into weekends wrapped in ordinary stillness. Simple treasures she had been denied for so long. Sharon even allowed herself to speak cautiously of building a sanctuary, a place where she could simply be a woman, not an image, whispering to one reporter, "It's nice to feel like you have a place to land." But just as she tried to protect their love from the spotlight, the shadows pressed in. Public comments from William's former wife began to ripple through the press, igniting tabloids that feasted on speculation. Sharon never responded, yet the ceaseless hum of gossip grew louder, like a low drumbeat she could not silence. Years later, with a sadness still in her voice, she admitted, "I wanted to keep what we had safe, but sometimes the world finds its way in, no matter how tightly you close the door." The strain was not a thunderclap, but a steady erosion. Conversations once free grew cautious, weekends once long became brief, and the vision of a shared life faded like a photograph left too long in the sun. By the end of 1993, still only 35, the engagement that had begun in radiant hope collapsed not with a fight, but with the arrival of a FedEx box, the diamond ring inside reduced to a formality, a coffin for a dream that had once felt alive. Sharon spoke sparingly of William afterward, never with venom, but with the weary grace of a woman carrying invisible scars, once saying, "Not every love story is meant to be told from beginning to end." For her, that engagement became both wound and lesson, a reminder that even at the brightest blaze of Hollywood stardom, her private world could collapse into silence, leaving her to gather herself alone in the shadows. As 1994 dawned, she stepped forward once again, not shattered, but bearing another scar invisible to cameras yet etched deep within. A scar that reminded her that triumph and sorrow were not opposites but twin threads forever woven into her life. And though she could not yet know it, the years ahead would summon storms far fiercer. A marriage that would test her soul, a fight for motherhood that would stretch her to breaking, and a brush with mortality so violent it would change her forever. For Sharon Stone, the heartbreaks that had already scarred her were nothing compared to the storm that awaited in her marriage to Phil Bronstein. A union that began in 1998 with shimmering promise, yet spiraled into one of the cruelest chapters of her life. At 40, while the world hailed her as untouchable at the pinnacle of fame, she longed for something deeper than applause, something that could not be stripped away when the lights dimmed. Phil, then 48, a journalist of sharp intellect and measured calm, seemed to embody exactly that: stability, dignity, and the forever home she had dreamed of in Hollywood's unforgiving glare. The difference in their ages mattered little compared to the harmony they thought they had found. Their wedding was intimate, but the joy she felt was vast. She confided to friends that at last her private life might shine as brightly as her career. In those early months, life together felt like a healing balm poured across every scar. Dinners by candlelight, lazy Sunday mornings with newspapers scattered across the table, whispered plans for a family they hoped would complete them. Friends said her laughter was warmer, freer, touched with the fragile sound of someone who believed the storms were finally behind her. "I thought I'd found my safe harbor," Sharon would later recall, her voice still trembling at the memory of that fragile peace. But life has a way of striking hardest just when hope feels strongest. Their careers tugged them in opposite directions, her endless filming schedules, his brutal newsroom deadlines, but the deepest fracture came from the tender dream of building a family. Sharon had always longed to be a mother, and with Phil, she finally dared to believe it was possible. Fate, however, showed no mercy. Already battling an autoimmune disease and endometriosis, between 1998 and 2000, she endured miscarriage after miscarriage, each one ripping through her body and her spirit, leaving her with nothing but the unbearable silence of empty arms. She would later call it silent grief, a sorrow so deep it seeped into her bones, lingering in every breath, even as the world went on untouched. At 42, she faced the crushing truth that her dream of a biological child was slipping away forever. "I wanted to be strong, to keep smiling for the cameras," she admitted, "but inside, I was breaking apart." Then, in 2000, came what felt like a miracle: the adoption of their son, Roan. The moment she first held him, Sharon felt a tidal wave of love and purpose crash through her. "From the moment I saw him, I knew I was his mother," she would say. For a time, his laughter stitched the cracks in their home, birthdays, garden play, and bedtime stories, filling the air with sweetness that made her believe, if only briefly, that love had conquered loss. To outsiders, she looked triumphant, the star who had everything. But beneath the surface, the grief still pulsed like an old wound, pressing against every joy. Sharon lived divided, dazzling on the red carpet one night, aching to be home with Roan the next. "I felt like I was failing at both," she confessed, torn between the image the world demanded and the mother she longed to be. Then, without warning, came the cruelest blow of all. In 2001, at just 43, a massive brain hemorrhage struck, leaving her with only a 1% chance of survival. For 9 agonizing days, she hovered at the edge of death, then clawed her way back, relearning how to walk, to read, to speak, rebuilding her life piece by fragile piece. And yet, before her recovery was complete, in 2003, Phil filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. To lose her marriage while still learning to stand again was a wound almost beyond words. Worse still came the courtroom battles over Roan. In the sterile chill of legal hearings, her motherhood was dissected and doubted. Lawyers asking whether a woman who had acted in an R-rated film could be fit to raise her child. Even a bizarre rumor about cosmetic surgery on her feet appeared in official documents. Humiliations that might have seemed trivial to outsiders, but to Sharon cut like daggers, stripping away her dignity at the very moment she was already on her knees. In 2008, the court delivered the blow she feared most. Phil was granted full custody of Roan, leaving Sharon only visitation rights. "I lost my family," she said simply, her voice breaking under the weight of years she could never reclaim. It was, in her own words, the most heartbreaking chapter of her life. Love turned to ash, motherhood torn away, dignity bruised, health shattered. And yet, even in that abyss, she endured. "You think you can't survive something like that," she reflected, "but you do. And when you do, you realize you're not the same person anymore." Her marriage to Phil Bronstein had begun as a beacon of promise, but ended as a crucible, a fire where love, loss, and resilience collided in ways both brutal and transformative. It could have destroyed her entirely. Instead, it forged her anew, not untouched, but unbroken, scarred, yet still standing, carrying the unyielding truth that sometimes the fiercest storms do not erase you. They reveal the strength you never knew you had. And so, each time Sharon smiled for the cameras in the years that followed, what the world saw was not just beauty and fame, but the quiet, unshakable courage of a woman who had already survived the unimaginable and chosen again and again to rise. If Sharon Stone once believed that losing her marriage and custody of her son was the cruelest fate could deal, she was mistaken. For the storm waiting in 2001 would not just wound her heart, but nearly extinguish her life. At 43, what began as a seemingly ordinary day erupted into horror when a bolt of agony exploded inside her skull. A brain hemorrhage so catastrophic that doctors whispered she had scarcely a 1% chance to survive. Her vision fractured into shards. The world spun into a black void, every sound stretched into an echo from another universe. Later, she would describe it as leaving her body, hovering between worlds, uncertain if she would ever return. She had brushed against death before. The childhood neck injury that rushed her to the hospital, the violent fall from a horse at 14, even the bizarre lightning strike that once jolted her into awe at life's fragility. But this was different. Those were warnings. This was annihilation. This was the moment every illusion of control was stripped away, when each fragile breath felt like a stolen miracle. And through the haze of hospital lights and the drifting pull of unconsciousness, one thought tethered her to this world: her son, Roan. She could not bear the idea of leaving him before he remembered her voice, her embrace, her love. "I thought about him every second," she confessed later. "If I had to crawl through fire to get back to him, I would." But fate's cruelty had not finished. The hemorrhage spiraled into a stroke and massive internal bleeding, her brain swelling dangerously while precious hours slipped away. Dismissed at first by doctors in what she later called medical gaslighting. By the time they recognized the truth, she was already vanishing. Against odds that defied reason, she lived. Yet survival was only the threshold to a grueling new battle. Recovery did not take weeks or months, but 7 unrelenting years. She had to rebuild her life from ashes, learning again how to walk without falling, to read without letters scattering into chaos, to write her own name, to speak without her thoughts dissolving mid-sentence. Each act the world takes for granted became an Everest climb. And she faced this not with a team of experts, but mostly alone. No comprehensive insurance, no tailored program, only fragments she could stitch together herself. Dragging her body through exhausting routines, even when progress was invisible. The physical torment was immense, but the emotional wound cut just as deep. Hollywood, ever hungry for novelty, moved on without her. Scripts that once sought her name began circling others. Casting calls stopped. The actress who had once commanded millions per film found herself erased, as though survival itself had stolen the mystique that made her magnetic. Then came the financial collapse. Legal costs from the custody fight, medical bills piling higher, the loss of high-paying roles. Together, they devoured everything she had built. She would later admit that her $18 million in savings had vanished, that assets she believed were hers were never even in her name. For a woman who had climbed to Hollywood's highest peaks, the fall was dizzying, humbling beyond belief. And yet in that abyss, she clung to fragile victories. The day she crossed a room without holding the wall. The bedtime story she read Roan from start to finish without stumbling. The miracle of a body she had to meet again, like a stranger. "I felt like I had been reborn," she said, "but into a body I had to learn all over again." These were triumphs unseen by cameras, but monumental in the quiet of her home. The pain, the exhaustion, the loneliness were relentless. She had lost so much: her marriage, her child's custody, her health, her fortune, her career momentum. Yet she had not lost the ember of resilience that had carried her through a bruised childhood, brutal auditions, and public heartbreak. That flame flickered, then grew. Slowly, stubbornly, she began to rebuild, not chasing prestige, but choosing roles simply to prove she was still here. She refused to conceal her scars. Instead, she spoke out about strokes, about misdiagnosis, about the invisible struggles of chronic illness, transforming her pain into a beacon for others stumbling through their own storms. Looking back, She would call the hemorrhage both devastating and clarifying. "When you come that close to death, you stop pretending," she said. "You see what matters. You fight for it. And you let go of everything else." What had nearly destroyed her instead remade her. The ordeal did not close her story, but became a brutal rebirth, stripping away illusions until only the essentials remained: her son, her dignity, her fragile health, and her unbreakable will. For most, such devastation would have been the final chapter, an ending written in silence. For Sharon Stone, it became something else, a second act, born not in Hollywood lights, but in dim hospital rooms, endless therapy sessions, and the unshakable conviction that her story was not over. Scarred but unbroken, she rose again, proof that even when life's cruelest storms tear everything away, they can reveal a strength you never knew was yours. After a lifetime etched with storms, scars, and heartbreaks so brutal they might have shattered anyone else, Sharon Stone did not simply return to the woman she once was. She rose as someone reborn, a soul tempered in fire, carrying her wounds like invisible armor, yet refusing to let them dictate her tomorrow. By her mid-40s, in the long shadow of the brain hemorrhage that nearly ended her life and the private losses that had stripped her to the core, she made a choice that would alter her path forever. She would not exist for applause, or for roles scripted by others, or for the fleeting adoration of the crowd. She would rebuild from within, shaping a life where beauty, meaning, and hope could coexist. Her first step in this quiet resurrection was to embrace a love she had harbored for decades: painting. The canvas became her refuge, a world where words were unnecessary, where grief, longing, and the fragile work of healing bled into color. Her brush gave form to fractured memories, to the turbulent shades of loss, to the soft hues of survival. What began in solitude soon became a voice shared with the world. Exhibitions in San Francisco, in Berlin, and a prestigious invitation to the Ara Pacis in Rome, a milestone placing her among celebrated contemporary artists. "Painting gave me a new way to speak," she revealed. "It became the voice for everything I could never say out loud." Yet her renaissance was never only about art. Sharon's heart, restless for causes greater than herself, poured into philanthropy with unstoppable urgency. She helped raise more than $34 million for HIV/AIDS research, funded programs for children and education, built schools in places where hope seemed absent, and supported projects for homeless youth. For her, giving was not performance, but a creed. Suffering must not be wasted if it can be transfigured into light for someone else. "When you survive what you think will break you," she reflected, "you discover a responsibility to help others survive too." These were not just words, but the compass of her new existence. And at the center of it all was motherhood, the anchor no storm could sever. With Roan already in her arms, she expanded her family, adopting Laird in 2005 and Quinn in 2006, weaving a circle of love she had once believed forever out of reach. Now, a mother of three, her identity was no longer tied to premieres or box office tallies, but to the everyday rhythm of love. Preparing breakfast before school, clapping from the audience during a school play, listening to whispered secrets before bedtime. "I used to think I needed a man to feel complete," she admitted with a smile, "but I discovered my children make me whole in ways I never imagined." In the end, Sharon Stone's true renaissance was not measured in red carpets or in the millions once printed beside her name. It was written in brushstrokes on a canvas, in dollars raised for the forgotten, and most of all, in the laughter of three boys whose voices turned her house into a sanctuary and her scars into a testament that out of the fiercest storms can come the most unshakable love. At 67 years old, Sharon Stone no longer resembled the woman the world once tried to label. She was something more profound, someone reborn from ashes, rebuilt piece by piece with scars that had become her strength. Every choice now reflected that hard-won independence. Acting continued, but only in roles that spoke to her evolving truth. Modeling, once a mere stepping stone, had returned as both an artistic outlet and an unexpected source of abundance. Her paintings, born out of silent grief and slow healing, spilled raw emotion onto the canvas, fractured light of memory, the bruised colors of loss, the tender shades of recovery, and soon found their place in galleries from San Francisco to Berlin, even preparing for the Arapazes in Rome, placing her alongside the world's great contemporary artists. Financial stability, once stripped from her by illness, betrayal, and heartbreak, had been painstakingly restored. By 2025, her net worth was reported between $25 and $60 million, not simply a measure of wealth, but proof that she had taken back control of a life once shattered. She lived in her beloved West Hollywood home, a sanctuary of light designed with Douglas Truesdale more than 25 years ago. Beyond it stood other reminders of how far she had come. The storied Seacliff Mansion in San Francisco, once valued at $39 million, and a sprawling 20-acre Montana retreat where silence and nature cradled her healing soul. Alongside these places of refuge, she built a collection of art, jewels, and investments that offered security she once thought forever lost. But Sharon's greatest treasure was not measured in homes or fortune. After standing at death's edge in 2001, she learned that true wealth was survival itself, the ability to wake each morning and still breathe. She embraced meditation, gentle exercise, and anti-seizure medication as rituals of care, while rejecting cosmetic illusions, choosing instead to let time write honestly upon her face. "I've made friends with my body," she said. "It's carried me through more than I ever thought possible."